Humanex Ventures presents Inside the Coaching Mind. Terry Pettit coached the University of Nebraska's first national championship team in 1995 and put the state of Nebraska on a path to volleyball greatness. Now, Terry mentors coaches, writes books, and gives talks about leadership and team building to corporate and business audiences. Here's Coach Pettit to take us inside the coaching mind.
Thank you, David Young. I also want to thank Brad Black and Humanex Ventures, an organization that recruits, develops, and mentors exceptional talent and coaches. And we have Brad Black with us today as our guest. He's authored a new book. I'll hold that up for you here. Talent, Culture, and Teams. Those of you who are watching on YouTube can see this. And in our show notes, we'll also give you the address where you can purchase the book. Brad is the CEO and president of Humanex Ventures, a talent-based organization, and we're going to talk about that today. I think I owe what success I had at Nebraska to being a talent-based coach. And I met Brad probably 20 years ago, and we struck a chord. He spent his whole life thinking about that and applying it to organizations like Stryker and Disney and schools in Michigan and hospitals and about any type of organization that you can. And they've had tremendous success. So I think you're going to appreciate this because the concepts that he talks about and introduces today can be applied to a 3-person team or a 1,000-person team. Brad Black, welcome to Inside the Coaching Mind.
Thank you, Terry. Real pleasure.
Well, you know, I had a turning point in my career as a coach, Brad, when I was at Nebraska. And it was fairly early when the strongest teams were in California and their players were more skilled. And so we had an option of either recruiting the second or third best player in California compared to UCLA, San Diego State, Santa Barbara, USC, or the decision I made, and that was to recruit extraordinary athletes and train them. And when we began, I wasn't sure whether it would work out. What I knew wouldn't work out was recruiting less talented people than the teams that we were going to try to beat if we wanted to compete for a national championship. At the time, nobody else was really thinking that way, at least in the world of volleyball. And then my thought on that was confirmed when I read Don Clifton's book, Now Discover Your Strengths or Soar with Your Strengths. It's the first time I was introduced to somebody that thought that way and had scientific information to prove that it would work. You had a personal relationship with Don Clifton. And when did that begin and how did he impact you?
Yeah, it started in the early 80s. So an organization I was recruited to out of college was one of the first 4 organizations that started working with Dr. Hall and Dr. Clifton in 1969. So I came along in the early 80s out of college and I went through 3-hour-long interviews on the phone. And they're asking me all these questions like, I don't know what these questions mean. I don't know what the answers are. I just know my answers. Well, obviously the process was I was selected to go in a management trainee role. They had one every 2 years. One person every 2 years was selected to basically be like graduate school in the organization. We had a parent company in Stamford, Connecticut. Our corporate office is in Omaha, and we had 18 divisions. So to go through that interview and then get a 7-page report, there was a story about me that articulated me better than I could articulate me. It described me, why I did what I did. And so it's like I got rocket fuel when I was 22 years old. It's like, this is me. And it's a language that the world doesn't speak. And so that was really kind of foundation. And then I'm recruited into that organization and I could have gone to strategic planning, finance. I could have done a lot of different things. But the deal was, as I went through that management training role, anytime anybody would recruit me, I could say yes or no. I just couldn't say no after 2 years. So along the way, the VP of HR recruited me, and he wanted me to be his right hand. So what I was essentially put in charge of was all of what I would now call the talent offense, to use the instruments back in SRI days before Gallup with those interviews, and to teach our people how to do it. But I came in an organization that had been doing it for 13 years. Our average sales rep was selling $1 million a year. We were 3X the industry. We were this amazingly successful company that was started by Warren Buffett and John Cleary in the late 50s, get into the early 80s, and it's just the language that I learned.
Well, I want to go back to that original conversation with Don Clifton. I want to know, what was the summary that they came up with? What did they say? These are things you do really well, Brad. These are things we can leverage. And give me an example of a question or two that you asked that you wouldn't have heard in a normal interview.
A lot of questions that you would not hear in a normal interview, because the normal interviews are, are you, yes, no, tell me your strengths, whatever. Most interviews are terrible. They're a conversation, and the worst performer and the highest performer could give you the same answer, or they're so obvious in what they're asking, it'd only be somebody who's not very smart would give you the wrong answer. What the level of these questions are is, like, I'll go down into the construct model that I created, is like, how are you motivated? What are you motivated by? And, so they'll probe, whether it's a competitive situation or where you're serving or supporting other people. They're trying to find out, what kind of fuel do you take? Because being motivated, there can be a yes, no, but the second part is, what kind of fuel do you take? And so that's a foundation piece. And when they're talking about, I'm mission driven, thinking, I'm 22 and, I've been working my way through school as a supervisor at UPS down at the hub in South Omaha while I'm majoring in accounting, but they're telling me I'm mission driven. It's like, okay, I have to think about this. And why do I work as hard as I work? Why do I care as much as I care? Well, why am I developing, the guys that are loading boxes better than anybody else? Because I wake up every day thinking about somebody else more than myself. And that was an example where you're identifying the mission driving somebody that goes deeper, that great coaches have.
If I'm Brad Black and you ask me, what am I motivated by? And I say, I'm motivated by serving other people. Mm-hmm. Then that determines your next question. That will impact what you ask. So what let's say.
Yes and no, because there would be a follow-up, give me an example. So there's going to be a lot of probing of give me example, because you don't want the theory answer, you want the proof answer. Okay. And so a lot of times people will stop at the theory answer and they won't say, well, please illustrate or give me an example. And then you have a story to tell. It's like, yeah, you can't make up that story on the fly. That's real.
Right. So Brad Black, when you're 21, 22 years old and they ask you this, or in your 20s, and they said, what are you motivated by? What did you say?
Serving and supporting. I love to win. I love a score. I mean, there's a number of factors of how I'm motivated. I mean, I love to score every night against 4 other people. And, every night, who has highest productivity? There's 5 of us, and I could be 1, 2, 3, or 5. I love being number 1. So I'm competitive. But also when I was number 1 again and again, I would raise the bar on myself. So something we've talked about earlier is, I'm not just competitive. I'm probably more driven to achieve than I am to compete, because I'm competing against myself. I'm raising the bar on myself. The best I've ever done is not as the best I could ever do. So that's a piece of it. And then you add the mission piece to it. So when you're thinking about, an example I can still remember, I'm in college and I wrote a $500 check to donate to a church to buy a cross. And they're like, what? You're a college kid and you gave $500 to a church to buy the cross? Why? Well, because I had the means, and why not? I'm not collecting things along my life to, put in the U-Haul when I die. I want to be able to give to people, and I want to be able to contribute to people. And so that may seem like kind of an odd thing, but it's just one more thing that and we've also talked about this, is, I grew up in a family where my mother and my father were, they were always, my dad was, the leader of his Masonic lodge. My mom was always the leader, of some church club. They were always in leadership. They had their own business. I watched them in their own business with customers, serving customers. I watched them serving 100 employees. Every day they're thinking about what somebody else needed. They were always there for somebody else. And so, when we think about talent, it comes from nature and nurture, but that's like an IV drip for a lot of years into my veins that, the two best role models of my life, my parents, they served and they just gave.
Brad, what you're describing there are also my parents, and that's that World War II generation. Was that more common then than it is now? Were those
Yes.
people more oriented toward service?
Yeah, I think, you think about life experiences, depression kids in World War II. Wow. Who's had those back to back? And you think about, they learned to sacrifice, and they learned everything's not easy, and they thought about somebody else, and they thought about somebody who's not coming home from war, that's, in their hometown, and families that have lost kids. I think that he treats a whole generation. And, what has he treated a whole generation like that since then? I don't think there's anything that compares. And so we're the beneficiary of that. We're the product of a lot of that. You can hear Sue Inc was talking about her father at a Normandy Beach, soldier, 2 Purple Hearts. Okay, we watch parents like that and going, we kind of have an easy life. We're not going to war. We're not living depression, but they're still giving. So if they can keep doing like that, that's kind of your standard. It kind of establishes your mental standard for, what you can do and what you should be, what you should aspire to be.
Yeah, you mentioned Sue Enquist, who Hall of Fame softball coach at UCLA, and also a performance coach for the last 2 USA women's indoor volleyball teams. A tremendous person, and I think she did masterful work in the Olympics that were in Beijing, which was during COVID, and she really brought a team together when they couldn't be together over Zoom. And I think a lot of that had to do with her relationship with you, Brad, and Humanex. I've heard you say that great coaching and leadership begins with caring. You have to care. The team has to sense that your care for them is more than what they can do for you. Is that a fair statement?
100%. 100%. If human beings can pick that up, they can smell it a mile away. It's either real or not, and you prove it in so many ways. Whether it's the sacrifice or the time or the appreciation or support, or how you demand or you develop, how you invest in them. In fact, in our assessments that we've done, and this is the culture work that I took to Don Clifton and my laboratory at Stryker. I was doing that 10 years before Gallup was doing any of the work in that area. And I would talk to them about, well, here's our research. And I can tell you, whether it's a sales force or operations, Puerto Rico, California, Michigan, didn't matter. Our very best leaders, that's the first thing that separates them. When I'm recruiting a junior military officer, and whether they're ROTC or West Point grad, didn't matter. Whether I'm recruiting somebody that's, student athlete out of Notre Dame or Western Michigan, didn't matter. But the core of what they start with when they're going to be responsible for somebody else is they have to genuinely care. I can't teach somebody to care. There's not a care class I can send somebody to who's got an MBA from Harvard who doesn't care about somebody more than themselves. The best ones care more about somebody else than themselves. And that's, building that model at Stryker, where it's like, we blew away all the records when people measured our culture because you reported to somebody who cared about you, worked hard, achieved a lot, raised the bar. But the core of it is that you knew you were reporting to somebody who cared about you.
So where did that concept come from? Where did you first start to think this is really important? This is a critical factor.
Well, again, I'll go back to parents, both parents, but I'd say especially my mother. when I would just see the deep relationships that she would establish with people, where people just adored her, respected her. She genuinely cared. She was that person that would just pour into you unconditionally, like Sue Inquis would talk about her mother. The same way I had, that's Mama E in Sue Inquis' world. I had the same kind of mother. And so when you've got somebody who unconditionally just invests in you and believes in you, and, it's like, okay, that's a nice grounding. But I also would look at my father, and while he demonstrated in very different ways, he was sacrificing for people all the time. He would work double shifts. He would take, overtime money, and he would buy a car for somebody that was a single mother at church, and he wouldn't talk about it. No one would know about it. But you think, okay, he worked double shifts. He's sleeping 4 or 5 hours a day, and he's giving his money away to somebody who's less fortunate, who's a single mother at our church. And I saw a lifetime of him doing that. So that was different than my mother, but at the core of it was somebody who cared.
But there was also, at least when I think, as you were talking there, I was thinking about my father. There was a real sense of humility. He was a wonderfully giving and successful coach. I never saw him put himself in front of anyone else. And
Exactly.
never saw him draw attention to himself. And now we're living in a culture, and I'm thinking in the world of sport, where it's all about me. It's all about me celebrating who I am, even as I score a touchdown or I make a basket or whatever, drawing attention to myself. So how do we battle that, or do we need to battle that?
Absolutely, we need to battle it, because the consequences are not going to be positive. The way I look at it, yesterday I was in Michigan with 3 different leaders, or actually 2 days before, and amazing leaders. I mean, inspiring leaders. One of them is in the Detroit area, a district that used to have 20,000 students and now has 10. But the leader is there saying, I'm not here to get a better job. I'm here to make people better. I'm here when times are tough to invest in people. And then he would talk about, his name is Alex O'Feely. He played football at University of Michigan. So the runner-up as a student athlete, his sister was an Olympic track athlete. But he had been coached. He had worked on teams. He knew how important it was to create a culture at Wayne Westland, that's the school district north of Detroit Airport, where people can learn these life lessons. And then he'd talk about Jason Malloy, the athletic director, who coincidentally 2 weeks ago was athletic director of the year in Michigan. He goes, the lives that Jason is changing by the coaches he's selecting and the standards he's creating and the cultures he's building are changing kids' lives. He would talk about, a young female wrestler that she's going to go to college and have a scholarship where she had no chance, no prayer to ever go to college, and how Jason would pour into her, the coach would pour into her when, being raised by a grandmother or a single parent. So that's why I feel so strong about the work that we do in athletics, because your very best, most impactful people in almost any community are going to be the coaches. And I'm nothing against the math teacher, the English teacher, they're going to be great too, but they don't have the conditions, the opportunity, the time, and the heat treating experiences like a coach has. So the more we can attract people into whatever it may be extracurricular, it could be a band director, it could be, that's a team, it could be show choir, that's a team, it could be cheer squad, that's a team. How you do that developmental work at that stage of someone's life can literally put them on a different road for the rest of their life.
Well, as you were speaking about those characteristics, I think back to coaches that Bill Byrne hired in Nebraska. So you're looking at John Cook,
Yep.
Mark Manning, the wrestling coach, they just finished second in the country.
Yep.
John Walker, the soccer coach, Rhonda Revelle, the softball coach, Dan Kendig, gymnastics. Those people were there for at least 20 years.
Yeah.
They exhibited caring. Their athletes didn't leave. They were highly competitive. So
And they also attracted staff like them that multiplied it.
right, right, yes. You look at the women who've gone through Nebraska volleyball that have gone into coaching,
Yeah,
um, and Danny Busboom Kelly is prepared better than any coach could possibly be to become
yeah.
the next Nebraska volleyball coach. Not just because she played at Nebraska,
But she's
but
been
because
developed,
she's been developed. Right. She went
right?
out and proved herself. So when I think at the AD level, and of course I've not been there a lot of years, but I think there were three ADs in particular that I really felt um, were intuitive about coaches' needs. Certainly Bill was, and then I felt Coach Osborne was, and
Yeah.
Coach Osborne kind of entered when things were in a crisis and football wasn't doing well, and then I think Trev Alberts could have been had he stayed there. I was disappointed when he left. He did a lot of good things. He met with people that you're talking about in Omaha, civic leaders and community leaders. And I have a good idea that the current AD is going to be that way. But we've never in this country had a time where the athletic director is so critical, and we've never had a time where so many of them don't value relationships with their team members. They've got a lot on their plate. They've got to go raise millions of dollars, but they also have to walk into these doors and ask these people how they're doing. And I don't,
Well,
and Brad,
it goes it goes back to one of the core things we've talked about is, do they think that in their job description or in the core of their being, they're there to build a culture? Because that's, I mean, it can't be, I'll just walk in and get the contracts and get the money and whatever. And we know fundraising's a reality everywhere, but it can't be that or that. It can't be, I'll get the fundraising and then I won't build a culture, or I won't build a culture where the coaches are cared about and supported. Because if the coaches aren't cared about and supported, and you start getting a merry-go-round, with the coaches, you get no stability. You're not going to have winning programs.
yeah,
And so,
we had a situation in Colorado where there was an AD that was a good person, um, but wasn't out in front of things. So when NIL came up, when conferences started realigning, when the answer to everything, well, let's see what everybody else does. You can't possibly you can't possibly grow and develop if that's your response in this environment. I just don't see it.
well, that's where, I mean, we talk about, I go back to the way that we think about talent and a construct model that I built years ago, because I could watch the pattern of success and failure for decades, and leaders and everywhere else, but especially leaders. And if you didn't have, in a sense, a vision of where you're going to go, if you didn't know what road you're going to take, who would want to get in the car with you? Okay, well, that's a leader. I remember it wasn't, a few years ago, we did the assessments for a medical school for the dean. It was a founding dean of the medical school, and 77 people applied for the role. They identified 20 semifinalists in Fast Track 5. And I came into the search committee at the 11th hour when they said, well, we need your help. And I said, well, thanks for bringing me in, a little late, but I'm going to have us interview the 20 because I guarantee you didn't get the right 5. And they're like, well, you didn't even meet the 5 that we fast tracked. And I said, I know you had opinions about their CV and what school they went to and, a lot of things that are obvious to people. But, remember that conversation you had about looking for a leader? And they looked at each other like they never had that conversation. I knew they never had that conversation. They didn't even know what they were looking for. So if you don't know what you're looking for, how will you know when you see it? They were just, having opinions from people that don't do this for a day job. And so, I start talking about this and I said, back to the 5-box leader in the book, I said, they've got to check 5 boxes. I can guarantee you'll see failure and struggle if they can't check 5 boxes. These aren't things that you can go rent from somebody else. Let's start with the engine. They've got to have the motivation. It's going to be a lot on their shoulders. This is a big job. They're going to work hard. There's going to be thankless moments. It's not going to be easy. You got to have a big engine. It's drives and values. And
Yeah,
values.
let's focus on that a little bit, because John Cook has drive.
Yeah.
You know, when
Enormous.
when I looked around to see who's the next person, I thought, this guy's not going to give up, and
Yep.
he's going to push the boundaries, and it's going to irritate people at times. I know that
Yep.
People will find this hard to believe, but there was a time women weren't allowed in the training rooms at Nebraska. There was a time women weren't allowed in the academic support center, and I challenged people, and fortunately we'd had enough success. I didn't get fired when I challenged them, but if you aren't willing to do that, you can't grow. You have to be willing to be an advocate for what you believe in, and John is just exceptional in that. That 92,000, which changes women's athletics.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know any other coach that would have taken that on. I see the same. Go ahead, Brad.
That goes to one of the other levels of the construct that I talk about that is the rarest. And it's one of the top two reasons that I see leaders fail. And that is they can't influence and overcome obstacles and dissent. If that's not popular, they can't be the windsock. They can't take the poll. They can't say what is everybody else doing. As soon as you do that, you're not a leader. That doesn't mean you're not paying attention to other things, but there's times when you're the first or the only. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes there's opposition. But if you can't influence behavior, direction, through dissent and conflict, if you can't work through the crosswinds and the headwinds, you're going to be severely handicapped or fail as a leader. Because we don't get to pick and choose our battles. We don't get to pick and choose who we compete against. We don't get to pick and choose what's going to happen next week or next month. It just comes at us, and we have to respond. But you, like John, like Tom, in different ways that you would demonstrate it, you have a conviction, which is kind of down in the bedrock, but you will work through dissent and obstacles. And that right there is a separator, and where people will fail. And it could be a nice resume, could be a nice person, could be a hardworking person. But if they miss that chip, it doesn't have a good outcome. So that's
Brad,
the constructs.
What's the biggest obstacle in that vein that you've personally faced? What was the biggest challenge that you felt kept you, or what could be in the way of you reaching your own potential?
Well, I would say, going from, I didn't want to go into HR, and I was recruited in HR to be the right hand, person to somebody when I was 22, and I got 20 years of experience in 5. So the quality and the content of experience that I got in 5 years from the age of 22 to almost 28 gave me a confidence that I could do things that no 28-year-old should even think they could do. And then I had the courage and the conviction to move my family 700 miles to a place that had just laid off 10% of its employees, had a militant union, been militant union for the last 30 years, 40% turnover in the sales force, and I'm in charge. I'm now number 1. So it's like only crazy people would do that.
What did Angie say about that?
Or Gloria, my wife.
Gloria.
Yeah, if she believed in me, and if that's what you want to do, I'm behind you. She was a wind in my sails. And so we go there, and obviously then the story is different when Don inducts me in the Hall of Fame, a few years later, and Jim Collins is coming to study us, and Disney's come to study us, and now it's the world dominating medical device company worth more than General Motors and Ford put together. It's created billionaires and millionaires. So it's the courage of your conviction. That's a huge part of it. It's that drive that you want to do something that's significant, because none of us will, get out of this, life, for another, we don't have a second chapter. It's this is the amount of time we have, and we want to make it matter. So there's kind of like, well, let's climb the mountain instead of watching other people climb the mountain. And going to Stryker for me was climbing a mountain, not a safe mountain. No one had climbed that mountain on the other side of that when Don recruits me to run strategies and practice at Gallup, because I had worked with him so close and built a laboratory that taught him so much. It was like, all right, no one can duplicate what I did as Stryker, but now I'm only in my 30s. I'm still pretty young in my career. Now I'm sitting on the other side of the desk teaching other people what I did, because I wasn't the VP of HR, but it was always the conviction of pour into somebody else, teach somebody else, show somebody something they could do that they don't know they can do. Believe in them more than there might be evidence they should believe in themselves. Teach them how to do something that nobody has ever taught them. Create a model that could be multiplied for years versus, not a one-hit wonder, but if you gave them a blueprint, a playbook that could last decades, because, what I built at Stryker still exists. And, while I was there 10 years and consulted another 5, that's 25 years ago. But the foundation, kind of like you at Nebraska, it's in its 3rd generation, but you laid a different kind of foundation. Not only what you did, the culture you built, the inspiration that was created, the development of all those women over the years, that has poured it into their lives and changed their lives for decades. And then John, and now, DBK.
Well,
that's leaders do.
I was so proud of John and how he handled his retirement. That he didn't wait until talent was gone. There's wonderful talent there, and he could have stayed longer, but he did it and brought in a great coach that can hit the ground running.
Because he cares more about the future and the program than himself.
Right.
Same with you and John. You could have stayed there for another 10 years or 20, but you go, no, I care more about this program. I want to give my family to somebody who's going to raise them while I go and pour into other people. And that's the heart of a coach, teacher, leader, like I talked about. So a Buzz Williams, a Sue Inquist, a Becky Burley, those are the kind of PJ Fleck. Those are the kind of people that pour into others. And it's not about what they get in return financially or status. It's like you can't even quantify. They're going to be intrinsic millionaires. They're going to change people's lives. And that's going to be an incredibly rich legacy. Going back to your original question, what we can do, I believe, every community, whether it's in Detroit or Omaha or Greeley, Colorado, or Dallas, find coaches like that who don't have a resume, who don't have a track record, who maybe didn't play the sport. Go find, Matt Rule that, maybe wasn't the very best athlete, but that's a great coach who cares about the Matt Campbells, the Dan Lannings. Go find all of those, and then you're pouring into hundreds of kids who are going to go, Dan Lanning, Matt Rule, Coach Osborne, Coach Pettit. I want to model my life after them. And they will. They will be in for 40 years.
And what you're hitting on there is talent's transferable. That Tom Osborne could have been a CEO of anything. He would have had that same brilliant mind. He would have had that same attention to detail. He would have been thinking about it all the time.
Sue Inquist's brother is a Hall of Fame global president Stryker that no one will ever match his record. He's 11 months older than Sue. He mentored Sue his whole life, and he was the most powerful, impactful leader in the history of Stryker, who did something in 18 years that no one will ever achieve again. So same DNA, same family, nurtured, but one went sports, one went business, and wow, look at that. And they could have switched. One could have gone into sports and the other could have gone into business, and you would have seen leadership that transcends the sport.
So the first 2 boxes are the first box is drive and values. The second one is work style. The third one, relationships.
Critical.
Brad, I think more coaches are fired because of relationships or lack of them that are fired for one-loss records.
Exactly. Yep.
I don't have the data to prove it.
I do. I see it. I've seen it for 40 years. So whether it's a sales manager, whether it's somebody run the sales force, whether it's a president, whether it's a coach, whether it's athletic director, whether it's a dean, whether it's a president of a university, I have seen it for 40 years. Number one reason they're fired, they don't develop the relationships. They're smarter than everybody else. They don't need anybody else. They just want a bunch of little doers around them who no one's going to give their all for somebody who doesn't care. Again, the core thing that you don't read a book and become that way. You are that way or you're not that way. And it's not extrovert or introvert. Coach Osborne has amazing relationship talent, and he's not an outgoing, charismatic guy, but he's got a 2-mile deep iceberg when it comes to relationship talent. So it's that core piece, however it's demonstrated, and there's more nuances than that. It's like, so who's going to build a team? Who's going to build a culture? Who's going to develop the leaders? There's a lot of in that relationship category. In fact, there's more things we measure in that category than any other of the 5 constructs because it matters more.
And if there's certain people that you don't relate to as well, and you're in a leadership role, then you have to hire people around you that have that talent. For example, on a volleyball team, you might have 14 players, and the head coach is focusing on the top 9. Yeah. But that head coach also has to relate to those other 7 or 8 players. It helps if you have an assistant coach like Kathy Noth, who's watching those people, comes up to you and says, "Hey, coach, Nikki Hank had a great practice today." And so the head coach goes over and says, "Nikki, thanks for what you gave today." But maybe my eyes were watching somebody on the other side of the net. Too many people, I think, hire people they're comfortable with than different talents. I see assistant coaching positions as talents. What can this person do exceptionally well?
Yeah. And it's the 1 + 1 = 3. And if they're smart about relationships and smart about building a team, they're looking for their supplements and complements. They don't want to have an unmotivated person because I'm motivated. No. I want a motivated person too. But in areas where somebody's stronger, maybe, you've talked about this before, and I can think about other top coaches I've talked to. They go, you know what? I'm not the one that's going to persuade a recruit, but I know who will. I know somebody that will be the phenomenal recruiter, but I'll be the phenomenal developer. Great. That's really smart. They get him, you grow them. Instead of, I need 2 people that will grow them, but nobody will get them. Or 2 people that get them, but nobody will grow them. You have to think about not only supplement, but complement talent. And most people don't do that, first of all, because they're not literate about their own. So if I'm not literate and aware about my own talents, and if I don't know what is my genius and what is my Mariana Trench, then I don't think about how to fill it. I just get people like me because people are more comfortable with me. Wouldn't the world be better for everybody just like us? Yeah, it wouldn't be better. It wouldn't be better. We might be more comfortable, but it wouldn't be better. And so when you're thinking about coaching, you have to have a coaching team. You have to have a coaching staff.
Right.
And when you have a coaching staff, you're going to have more stability. You're going to have more trust. You're going to, that's a big, big job. But that's a critical difference maker that I've seen coaches miss the boat. It's not just filling the jobs with people that have done the job. It's, did you pick the right ones, and did you build a team among the coaches? And,
right.
And I don't see coaches that know how to do that.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, people like Fiona Nepo was a setter, 3-time All-American, is a great assistant coach. Val Novak came back to Nebraska, 2-time All-American, great assistant coach. Nikki Stryker, MVP of the conference, came back, assistant coach, went on to be a head coach. And Christy Johnson, a head coach at Iowa State, a setter. Kathy Noth was my assistant for 10 years. When you can find those people in your organization, it isn't Terry's team. their life was changed by that organization. Their life
Yep.
was changed by Nebraska Volleyball. They
Right.
are emotionally committed to making that program better. And of course, Coach Cook had Jordan and Kelly Hunter on his staff. I think that makes a tremendous difference when you can promote people that have come through that process. You've said that maybe the rarest of these 5 characteristics is influence.
Yes.
I hadn't thought about that till you mentioned it the other day. What do you mean by influence?
Well, the ability to influence somebody else when there is dissent and conflict and resistance. It's not on a nice sunny day when everybody agrees with you and you have all the authority and all the power. No, that's not real. That's not real world. Real world is you're going to take somebody in a direction to go in the dark, and they have to work against opposition. And so whether it's courage, courage is an influence talent. Persuasion is an influence talent. Command, taking charge, is an influence talent. Resilience is an influence talent. Those are all things that, in a sense, keep things moving forward. And if nobody has anything in that level, when the drawer's open, going, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. I mean, I've seen so many times when people go, but they're so knowledgeable, so likable, so experienced, so hardworking. But if that drawer is empty, if you can't check that box, it won't work, because leaders don't get the luxury of people will just do what I tell them to do. Everybody will agree with me. Every decision will be easy. Sorry, that's not the real world. And especially, Sue teaches a class at UCLA in the graduate program and uses our book as a textbook. And so she uses that book as a textbook, obviously, because she knows the content very well. She's in the book. You're in the book. Her brother's in the book. A lot of these people talk about it in the book. But the essence of the book is really talking about transformative leaders. And the real leaders are transformative. They don't leave anything the way they inherited it.
I'm gonna pause you right there, because transformational leadership is a buzzword. Transactional leadership is a buzzword. Talk about the difference. What does a transformational leader do that a transactional leader doesn't do?
Well, first thing I say is the transformational leader will change lives. The transactional coach, they'll hit the numbers, they'll win the game, but they're not changing lives. No one's putting their career, their life, their family on the line for a transactional coach. Transactional coach, you're going to keep the job or not keep the job moment by moment if you win. And the sad thing is that's the model that most people grow up under as a transactional coach. You'll stay here as long as you win. And a transformational coach doesn't mean I don't have the luxury of losing. It means that's just kind of like the floor. We're going to win, but we're going to win at a higher and deeper level. We're going to win. We're going to change people's lives. We're going to build cultures that are going to be transformative. Like, people come and study us like they never came and studied anybody. You're going to give away the playbook and the blueprint or the recipe so somebody else can experience that. That's a transformative coach or a leader versus a transactional. The transactional, they just do the obvious things. They yell, score more, sell more, make more. It's like, duh, Captain Obvious. That doesn't really help. But if you teach me how to sell, if you teach me how to teach, if you teach me how to lead, wow, you could change my life. So that's why I go back to, there's in transformational leaders, there is a teacher. There's somebody who wants to teach the lesson. There's somebody who wants to do the homework with a team. There's somebody who won't have all the answers. There's somebody who will ask somebody else's opinion. There'll be somebody who doesn't have to have all the answers and be right all the time. They'll be vulnerable. And a lot of that is the relationship and influence constructs together. When that becomes a new level of a foundation, then you have the chance to see how this person's going to transform. And not to leave out the last one, because it's important too, the thought process. The great ones have a vision of a better future, and they're inspiring, they're inspired, and they're going to figure it out along the way. They don't have to have all the answers. And so they're the ones that can be out there on the front when it's dark and the flashlight's not working real well. And they're like, but in my head, I can see how it's going to be. I know you saw that when you probably drove from North Carolina to Nebraska. You probably didn't have it all written down, but I guarantee you somewhere between your ears was this picture of how it was going to be. And so when 92,000 were playing in Memorial Stadium, that wasn't a shock to you. That was just kind of like another chapter of something that you felt years before, because transformative leaders want to leave something better than they ever inherited, and they will pay a price, sacrifice for it, and do it because it's about the future and other people, not themselves. It's not about how much money did I make, what title did I get, how can I go get a better job, more money. They're selfless, not selfish. They're long-term, not short-term. They're other-oriented, not self-oriented. And that's what you get in the essence of a transformative leader. And, Coach Wooden had a big impact on Sue Enquist. He mentored her, and he would say, like, you hear Nick Saban talk about this and other people talk about when sometime in their career, a transactional coach kind of was cold water in their face, like, I can be better than that. I got to stop being that way. I got to graduate out of being the yeller to the screamer and just the one who wins enough. And they realize there's another level they have to graduate to. Sue realized that, with a lot of influence of Coach Wooden. Nick Saban talks about that. Other people have always been that way, but most of them are transactional coaches. Most are transactional leaders. The world's filled with them. Just hit the numbers, hit your numbers, have a nice job, make a lot of money, live in a nice house. But whose lives did they change?
Yeah, that's really good stuff. Well, I appreciate that. There's an area that you've impacted that I don't have any insight into that's based on these same things. But one of the most amazing things I think that I've read about Humanex is the impact on Kalamazoo in the community, because I know how to organize a team. I can even think about an athletic department. I can't think about how you get something where it might involve 100,000 people, what might impact those lives. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, so over the years, when I went from being the one that did it to being the one that taught it, I spent about 6 years going to Florida, 3 weeks out of 4, to build a model in hospitals, because people knew what I did at Stryker, and they thought, well, that's just like this Hall of Fame thing. You did it one time, one place. I said, no, I will use the blueprint, the playbook, and I will show you another place with different people how it can be done. So, I'm doing that again and again and again. And hospitals in Florida, whether it's Florida Hospital or HCA hospitals, wherever they might be, never had success that they never had, where I was able to teach the leaders, this is how you do it. Basically the foundation of talent, culture, and teams. So I would have partners with me and I'd teach them, and they could go from 27th percentile of a culture to 99th percentile of a worldwide database, going, wow, you taught me how to build a culture. You shared my talents with me that I didn't know I had in me. You did that thing for me when I'm 45 that happened to you when you were 22. So I kept doing that. And then, the largest shareholder in Stryker, as you know, the Stryker family out in Fort Collins, well, the older sister and the husband, he called me. He's my old boss is from Stryker's best friend. And he said, I wrote a $55 million check to buy the downtown hotel, and I became the complaint department. And I didn't do that to become the complaint department. And I know you work with Ritz-Carlton, and I know you work with Broadmoor, and I know you worked in hospitality. I know you're the Stryker guy and all that. And I get my $93 million dividend check. And sometimes I think about you because your talent offense is famous. Could you show me? Could you show my wealth management company and my hospitality organization how you do what you did, or how you did what you did at Stryker? And I said, sure. So I spent about 3 years doing that, and success that they had never had. And then he came to me one night for dinner. He said, "Hey, would you join me for dinner?" He said, "I'd like to write a check so you could create something that's never existed." He said, "You taught Don a lot. Don taught you a lot. But I know the model that, Stryker was your blueprint. It was your architecture. Could you do that beyond a Stryker?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "The most powerful model is a community model. Because when our kids and our neighbors and our spouses are all working in great cultures, under great leadership, and with great coaches, teachers, wherever it may be, we have a great community." And I said, "So if you get great schools, and in great schools, you're going to have great coaches, and you have great hospitals, and you have great private businesses, then you're going to have a different thriving community." So Kalamazoo is the example. So our story is my story, I guess, if somebody would follow the path. It's a chapter 4 of a book called Community Capitalism. And so basically it's when I got recruited and the transformation at Stryker. But then went on to when they, Bill Johnston and a few other people said, "Start your own organization here and teach our community how to do this." So whether it's an auto dealer, whether it's a manufacturer, whether it's a hospitality organization, whether it's recruiting PJ Fleck with the worst resume in the pile and saying that's the guy with the worst resume should be the guy, and he transforms things at Western Michigan, this would be a model that we've never seen. And we're 20 minutes to the west of Battle Creek, where Kellogg's is headquartered, but there's no energy in Battle Creek, Michigan. We're 40 minutes to the east of Benton Harbor, where Whirlpool's got their world headquarters on beautiful Lake Michigan, but they just laid off 1,000 people. What's different about Kalamazoo? It's not the weather. It's not the politics. It's the leadership in the community that says we're going to be littered about talent, culture, and teams. So obviously Stryker and Greenleaf and all these other organizations. So the concentration of literacy around talent, culture, and teams on a per capita basis can't be matched. But we have the same thing in Chicago with scores of school districts. We have the same thing in Cincinnati, Dayton, and Columbus. We have the same thing in Dallas. We have the same thing in Greeley, Colorado. We have communities around the country where you plant a seed, you teach somebody, it's irrespective of industry, it's irrespective of geography. You teach them how to define, measure, and build talent, culture, and teams. Because the world does not have a classroom to do that. So we have to create these real life classrooms where, say in Colorado, go to Bessler Homes. And Bessler Homes or Ames Community College, they're doing things that their peers aren't doing. And they're having success like their peers aren't having. Yesterday, I was with the number one supplier to Frito-Lay in the world. And they have farms in Colorado, Nebraska, Michigan, South Carolina, Texas. And we've worked with them for 14 years. And Frito-Lay cannot figure out how Walther Farms is in a class by themselves. It's like, how are you the only organization that supplies us that does it 52 weeks a year? Nobody else can figure out how to do it. And you will see on their, if you go to their website or logos, talent, culture, and teams. They're like, they get inner city kids who are farm managers. When no one else would recruit somebody from the inner city of Chicago to work on a farm, they'd go recruit farmers' kids. And they said, it doesn't matter where somebody comes from. It matters, are they motivated? They build relationships. They get stuff done. They look purely through the lens of talent, like I did JMOs or student athletes at Stryker, or you looked at athletes. You didn't look at the resume. You didn't look at the skill set. You didn't look at the finished product. You looked at the potential. You go, I got a redwood seed. And as long as people are collecting the redwood seeds along the way, and they will plant them and soak them in Miracle-Gro, you watch people be successful. And everybody else will think they're a phenomena or an anomaly. And it's not a anomaly, it's a model. And if you follow more of it, it becomes contagious.
Well, Brad, that is wonderful, and I sure appreciate the support that you've given our podcast. We've tried to bring on 5 box leaders as guests on this on this show, and
You've had him.
yeah, when you look out there, I mean, we just had two retire in Nebraska, Kirsten and John. You could
Yeah.
not find two better examples of leadership. Before
Yeah.
we go here, I want to know if there's a school district or a business or an organization or a community that would like to take advantage of your talent, how do they reach you?
www.humanexventures.com. They can Google us. And one of the best things I would say, and you know this because you've been to it, I would say they would want to sign up to come to our summit. They would want to be with us for 2 days and be around people that are building excellence into their community, into their organization, because it'll be inspiring. They could be around 7 tables from the middle of Nebraska or northern Colorado or Chicago. And just being exposed to that, it's almost like they found a place they never knew while somebody was pouring into them. So I was always going to encourage people, sign up to come to our summit. We don't require somebody to be a client partner of ours to come to our summit. We want to educate them. We want to pour into them. And then I would also say, and go to Amazon.com and buy the book.
Right.
Paperback, hardback, or Kindle version. But read the book and then say, there's something in here that intrigued me. In the back of the book, I learned more about what you do, and I want to call you, whether I'm a coach or I'm a private business leader or a superintendent or a university president, that I wasn't raised knowing how to define, measure, and build talent, culture, and teams. And if somebody can teach me how to do that, it's not a question of intelligence, it's a question of literacy. And if you want to do it bad enough, you're going to find the teachers and the support to do it. And again, in the book, there's so many names and examples across industry and geography that, like, I can give you examples of people that are like you, just further down the road, who at one time said, I want to do it bad enough, and reach out, and now all of a sudden they're modeling it for somebody.
Well, Brad, that summit's at Baxter Arena in Omaha, and I'm looking at the dates here, but I don't have my glasses, so I can't read it off.
June 25 and 26.
June 25, 26, and
Yep.
there's
So when we
and Sue Inquist will be speaking in that. Sue's a powerful speaker.
She's very powerful. I mean, where do you find an 11-time national championship coach who then is the performance culture coach for a different sport and is a critical difference maker? Why we come back from Tokyo with a gold medal and a silver medal in Paris. She did it. She does it. She's the real deal. She's inspiring. And Don Yeager, 12-time New York Times bestselling author. He's a who's who in his world. Wrote his first book, co-wrote his first book with John Wooden. But he's written the life story of Warwick Dunn, Walter Payton, Jack Nicklaus, Bubba Watson, Deion Sanders. I mean, he's a who's who of telling stories about greatness. We've got Stephen Mack.
I also enjoyed John Bacon, who I enjoyed him for several reasons, but he's a wonderful writer, a journalist, and he takes this high school hockey team. That's the worst team in Michigan.
Let Them Lead. Phenomenal book. Yeah, he's there. He's very popular. He's powerful. But yeah, we have 6 people like that on the stage. And then we have 20 breakouts where you're with these people behind the scenes saying, well, now I have a how question. I have how'd you do this? Why? So it's nice to be able to have those people that have done it, like the Sue Inquist, where you can say, okay, I've got the question that may sound like a dumb question, but I need to know how you did that. How'd you face this real life situation? And you don't meet very many people with that track record who will give you the answer of what they did or didn't do or regret or would do different. In addition, practitioners that have done things at a high level, whether they're athletics. I mean, there's an amazing athletic director, Josh Looney in Northern Alabama. We talk about a culture builder, relationships. That's Josh Looney. I mean, he had stint at the Magic, at the Chiefs, the NCAA, Missouri Western, and now at Northern Alabama. He'll be there with coaches from Kansas or West Point. So a lot of people with, different walks of life will be there saying, well, here's how you do it at West Point. Here's how you do it at Kansas. Here's how you do it in golf or volleyball or baseball or whatever. Here's how you do it in a school district in Chicago. We're going to have probably 10 superintendents of the year from around the nation that are going to be there together. So anybody who wants to run a great, school district can talk to these people that somehow became the number one in their entire state. So that's why I feel so strong about the summit. Is it's a transformative experience to come. People have said that for years.
Yes, and I've experienced that myself. It's wonderful. I want to thank you so much, Brad, for your insight and for your support of me. And I also want to let people know that coming up on a podcast in the near future, John Dunning, the former national championship coach for Stanford, and we're going to talk about talents of coaches that we competed against and admire. And that should be a lot of fun.
He's a 5-box leader, don't you?
Yes. Yeah. I don't like to spend time with people if they aren't. But
that's where the lessons are. The people that have done it.
Yeah. And today, Brad, I went for coffee. A guy saw the Nebraska shirt I have on, and I don't wear it very often. When I do a podcast, I do. The guy comes up and he runs a flight school. And he wanted to talk. We got together in a conversation about teaching young people how to fly a Cessna. And I said, what's the most difficult thing? You get to a certain point where to get better, it's not about learning more about volleyball. It's about learning from other disciplines and applying it to the one you're in. And I'm speaking to the choir here with you, because you have a great understanding of that. I also want to thank David Young, our producer. And folks, we'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed this.
Thank you, Terry. Real pleasure. Take care.
Inside the Coaching Mind is presented by Humanex Ventures and is pleased to be a part of the Learfield Varsity Podcast Network. If you're on Facebook, look for the Inside the Coaching Mind group and join a vibrant discussion of volleyball and leadership. TerryPettit.com is where you'll find Terry's books, writings, and downloads, as well as subscription links for all your podcast apps.